Welcome to Myth Madness. Over the last few episodes, I've covered parts of the Garshaspnama, a Persian epic poem composed around 1066 AD. The Garshaspnama is all about the hero Garshasp. In the first part, I covered Garshasp's ancestry and told how he was descended from the legendary king of the world, Jamshid. In the next part, I talked about how a young Garshasp slayed a dragon, and compared this to earlier traditions of Garshasp as a heroic monster slayer in Zoroastrian religious texts. Then, in the last two episodes, I retold Garshasp's adventures in India, how he fought a war against a rebellious prince, toured the land, and saw many wondrous and strange things. He was sent there by his overlord, the wily and capricious king Zahhak, who ruled the world with an iron fist, and who had serpents sprouting from his shoulders. On his quest, Garshasp had spent a lot of time in India, more than he was supposed to. This episode will cover more of Garshasp's adventures in the Garshaspnama, specifically what he did after returning from the east. Enjoy. Leaving India, it was time for Garshasp to travel back to his home in Sistan. When word of his arrival reached his father Athrat, the old man was overjoyed and went out to meet his son. Father and son hugged each other. Garshasp told him of his travels, and then finally rested for a full month. He couldn't stay for too long, though. Garshasp had collected a number of fabulous treasures while in India, and it was time to take them to his liege lord. The hero wrapped up the presents, said farewell to his father, and set out to visit Zahhak. Leaving Sistan, he passed through the desert. The desert dwellers, demonic Deves and lions, avoided the hero, but he could still hear their cries echo around him. He stopped off at an oasis, and then finally left the sand and salt behind when he came to a village with beautiful, well-watered gardens. Garshasp and his men walked into one of the gardens to take a look. He went over to a fountain to wash his face, and they admired the vines that grew there. The owner of the garden was disturbed by the trespassers. He marched in and angrily yelled at them. Garshasp and the man got into a heated argument, and the man threatened to cut his horse's ears off. Big mistake. A now very angry Garshasp grabbed him by the beard, cut off his head, and stomped it into the ground. But that wasn't enough. Garshasp then allowed his men to plunder the village and burn it to the ground. Not very heroic. One man was left alive, and this was the brother of the rude garden owner. He went to the local lord, Shiroi, and told him about Garshasp's evil deed. Shiroi told him he would take the matter to the king. Meanwhile, Garshasp arrived at Zahhak's palace, and the king sat him next to his throne, kissed his face, and asked the hero many questions. Garshasp provided gifts of jewels and told the king what he had seen during his years in India. Then, for the next 2 months, every evening Garshasp had treasures from the caravan brought out and gifted to Zahhak. Yet one day, when Garshasp came before the throne of Zahhak, he was stopped by the garden owner's brother and Shiroi. They accused Garshasp of killing the garden owner and destroying the village. Zahhak asked Garshasp what had happened, and the hero told him that the fight had been instigated by the behavior of the garden owner. Garshasp also accused Shiroi of conspiring against him. After hearing everything, Zahhak ordered Shiroi be fed to hungry lions. He gave all of Shiroi's belongings to Garshasp. It's a surprising and cruel turn of events. Garshasp was clearly in the wrong here, but why did he not face the king's justice? Well, behind the scenes, an oracle told Zahhak that doing something bad to Garshasp would make the king miserable. So Garshasp's head was never fed to the serpents that grew from Zahhak's shoulders, and Garshasp never faced consequences for sacking the village. Additionally, Zahhak wrote a letter to Garshasp's father, expressing how impressed he was with Garshasp and instructing Athrat to choose a wife for him. Shortly afterwards, when Garshasp returned to Sistan, his father followed Zahhak's advice and assembled a number of beautiful young women for Garshasp to meet. But while all of them showed their affection for Garshasp, and he himself made a lot of effort, the hero did not like any of the girls. Meanwhile, far away to the west, in the land of Rum, there was an ambitious king. He had a very pretty daughter. She had tulip-red cheeks, almond eyes, was slender like a cypress, and had a face as beautiful as the moon. She was also smart, and her father regularly asked her for advice on matters of state. Many suitors came from across the land to try and marry the princess, but her father didn't give her away, and she didn't want to go either. These constant refusals made the king many enemies, and he had to come up with a clever trick so his reputation was not hurt. The king ordered that a heavy bow be constructed with a bowstring made of chain. He said that the man who could string and draw the bow would marry his daughter and become his son-in-law. Garshasp heard of this princess and her father's challenge and wanted to try. At first, his father Athrat tried to convince him not to go, but Garshasp could not be persuaded. His heart burned with feelings for the woman he already considered his future wife. So instead, Garshasp's father Athrat gave his son advice for the journey ahead, that he should not travel alone and should take trustworthy companions, that he should live celibate and not steal anyone's food, that he should not allow others to sit on his horse, to be careful of thieves and not build bright fires at night, don't drink water without trying it first, not to tire his horse and always hold onto the reins, always have his bow ready and be prepared for an ambush at any moment, don't fight with people of higher rank, and on and on. It was lots of advice, and since Garshasp had already set out and traveled around India, one wonders why Athrat felt the need to share all the advice now. But maybe Athrat was just a worrier of a parent. At the end of the conversation, he held Garshasp to his chest for a long time, with tears in his eyes, before saying goodbye. When Garshasp was ready, he rode out with everything he needed. He was accompanied by a young Turkish boy who would serve as his squire and servant. Otherwise, he was alone, without an army, and the Turkish boy will actually drop into the background of this story too, and we won't really hear from him at all. Eventually, they arrived at a spring, where a lion scratched in the dirt and lay in wait to attack a wild donkey nearby. Garshasp watched, and when the lion struck and killed the donkey, Garshasp rushed forward and killed the lion. He lit a fire, impaled the dead donkey on a lance, and hung it over the fire like a spit. While he prepared their dinners, 2 travelers arrived at their small camp. One was from Rum, and the other was from the east. When they saw Garshasp, they burst into cries of praise for the hero, and he invited them to join his meal. As they ate, the man from Rum told Garshasp about the king of Rum, his beautiful daughter, and the challenge the king had set up for her suitors. The man told Garshasp that no one so far had been successful. This news excited Garshasp so much, he quickly rose like a storm wind and climbed into his saddle. He set off at once for Rum, without even pausing to hear what the traveler from the east had to say. 2 days of traveling later, Garshasp came to a place where a whole bunch of people lay on the ground. They were all naked and their hands tied, and a number of them were wounded as well. Garshasp was astonished. He asked them what evil had occurred. The people told them that they were merchants. They were taking a caravan of treasures from Egypt to Rum, but were attacked by thieves, robbed, tied up, and left for dead. The merchants begged Garshasp to fight the thieves. So Garshasp galloped off in the direction the thieves went. He soon caught up to them and demanded their surrender. They refused, and so Garshasp killed a few of them before the rest begged for mercy. He took their horses and stolen goods, spared them, and then returned to the merchants. After that, the merchants continued their journey to Rum, and Garshasp traveled with them. Along the way, he befriended one of the merchants. When asked why he was going to Rum, Garshasp spoke about the daughter of the king, but kept his own name and his father's name secret. The merchant was from somewhere near the Roman king's palace. When the caravan reached his manor, the merchant invited Garshasp to stay at his house. The merchant gushed to his wife about the hero, and they entertained him with wine, music, and good food for several days. While Garshasp stayed there, a woman who worked as the nurse for the king's daughter arrived at the manor to visit her friend, the merchant's wife. She spied Garshasp sipping wine under the shade of the garden's trees, and amazed by his size and handsomeness, asked the merchant's wife who he was. The merchant's wife responded that she didn't really know. He had great strength, education, dignity, and was a highly skilled horseman. And every day he talked about his love for the King of Room's daughter. He came to the manor along with her husband, and wanted to continue on to the palace and try drawing the king's bow. The nurse was astonished. When she returned to the palace, she rushed to tell the princess all about the mysterious hero. Our tulip-faced princess was excited by the news. She decided to go out and see this man for herself. She waited until evening and then set out to find the hero. The poem has her go up to a high balcony and observe Garshasp from above. She saw him sitting in a chair below, drinking quietly from a wine cup. She noticed his youth, his tall stature, and his face. She watched as he took out an arrow and shot a bird out of the sky. The princess fell in love with Garshasp, and her cheeks burned with the heat of 2 suns. When she returned to her room, the girl was cold. Her nurse asked her what was wrong, and she replied that her love for the mysterious hero had made her weak. The nurse told her not to worry. She would take care of everything. So the following morning, the nurse went back to the merchant's estate. She conspired with the merchant's wife to bring the princess the following night, so the 2 young people could meet. The merchant and his wife prepared the garden for a feast, more beautiful than the first days of spring. Garshasp and the princess were brought to the feast, and we get a lovely description of the princess's beauty, of her hair, her eyes, her face. The 2 of them drank wine together, listened to music, and secretly kissed. The nurse and the merchant's wife were overjoyed, but they were troubled by one thing. The girl's finger still did not have a ring. When it was late, the princess went back to the palace. In their separate bedchambers, princess and hero spent the night aroused with love and passion, impatient for morning, and with eyes that did not shut for sleep. The following day, Garshasp went to the palace of the King of Room. Garshasp introduced himself as Bab. He declared he was a foreigner from Iran and had come to meet the king and try and draw his bow. The palace inhabitants mocked this newcomer. He had no treasure, armor, or army. If kings and princes could not complete the King of Room's bow challenge, what hope did this man with 1 horse and unknown origins possibly have? Nevertheless, the king was amused, and he told the master of ceremonies to allow the stranger into the great hall. At the very least, they could all have a good laugh at him. The King of Room told him that if he stretched the bow correctly, the princess would become Bab's wife, but if he failed, the king would hang him upside down on the gallows. Next, the king had the bow brought in. It was so heavy, 10 men were needed to drag it into the hall. The princess sat next to her father. She nervously watched as Garshasp knelt in front of the bow and raised it above his head. He placed it on his knees, bent it gently 3 times, and then on the 4th time attached the string. Easy peasy. When it was done, Garshasp snapped the bow in 2 and threw the fragments in front of the king's throne. The king was impressed, and told Garshasp he could now marry his daughter, but requested more time to make preparations. Garshasp declined, and said he would take the princess now if she would have him. The princess feared her father secretly intended to hurt Garshasp, and so she told him it was better for a wife to be with her husband and not her father. The king did not like this, and became angry. He told the princess she was a disgrace, that he once thought she was a jewel, but had now learned she was only a simple rock. He told Garshasp and the princess to leave the palace at once. If they stayed too long, they would be attacked with arrows and stones. So Garshasp and the princess left. Garshasp pulled numerous shining jewels out of his sleeves and decorated his new wife's clothes with them. He hoisted her up onto his horse and led the way out of the Roman palace. The merchant Garshasp had met on the way to the palace came forward to say goodbye to the hero. He presented the couple with gifts, and the king saw this and afterwards asked the merchant how he knew the man. The merchant told the king the whole story, about how Garshasp rescued the merchant caravan, fought the thieves, and everything else. After he heard the story, the king became anxious. He wondered if he had behaved too rashly, and if the young man who was taking his daughter was descended from heroes. He called for one of his captains, and told him to assemble a force of proud warriors, follow the mysterious man, and bring him back to the palace. It took 2 days for the king's men to catch up to Garshasp and the princess. They told him the king's message, that if Garshasp returned, he would be made a general of the Roman army, and the kingdom, treasure, and throne would be his. Garshasp's answer was essentially, "No, too bad. You had a precious stone but threw it away out of ignorance." The king's men were sent away, and Garshasp and the princess galloped off into the Egyptian desert. The hero and the princess traveled for 10 days through the desert. Eventually they came to a mountain, and high above them rose a castle dark against the sky and surrounded by a haze. In the castle lived a man, who is described like a monster. He looked like a demon, tall, black, and had the tusks of a boar. His castle guarded a city, and the people who lived in the city carried out this monster man's orders out of fear. Every so often he would take a young girl back to the castle and rape her. When Garshasp approached the castle, its watchman pulled a bell to alert the monster man in the castle. He was drunk, and wine cup in hand he left the castle and snuck up behind Garshasp. With a loud yell he threw a rock weighing the same as 30 men at Garshasp. But the hero ducked his head right in time. The monster man threw a heavy branch, and this hit the hero in the shoulders, hurt him, and broke a piece off his shield. But now it was Garshasp's turn. He pulled out his club and gave the man such a blow that his eyes popped out of his head along with his brains and blood. Garshasp cut the head off the corpse and made his way to the castle. He found the city it guarded, and a crowd soon gathered around him, wondering who he was. Garshasp threw the severed head onto the ground. When the people saw that the lord of the castle was dead, they rejoiced. They were finally free of his wickedness. The people went up to the castle and carried off all of its riches. They then burned its walls to the ground. They asked Garshasp to stay with them and be their king, but Garshasp declined. He waited a week and then moved on, taking the princess back home. Back in Sistan, Garshasp and the Princess of Rum were married. The princess secretly wrote a letter to her father, telling him all about the hero's deeds, his dignity, and what had happened at the castle in the desert. The king of Rum sent a caravan of gifts to be given to the couple. He also wrote a letter filled with apologies for how he had behaved. Garshasp's anger was appeased, and they were all reconciled. After marrying the Princess of Rum, Garshasp took a number of astrologers and engineers and founded a city called Zarang. Garshasp had a castle built and fortified it with walls and ditches. The city was an engineering marvel. Water was diverted from the Hilmond River and carried around the city in underground pipes. Meanwhile, in nearby Kabul, trouble was brewing. Previously, Kabul had fought wars against Garshasp's father Athrat and the Persians of Zabul and Sistan. They were defeated, and the king of Kabul agreed to pay a regular tribute to Garshasp's father Athrat. However, now the king of Kabul's son had started skimming from the tribute and building up his own riches. This son desired a kingdom of his own to rule over, and after 2 years of diverting funds from the tribute, he had grown for himself a sizable war chest. Nevertheless, the son's vizier warned him to beware of Garshasp and the Persian army. But the son told him not to worry and to ready the Kabul army. Another man, named Anbarsal, was appointed general of this army, and he led the troops to go to battle against the king of Zabul. When Athrat learned of the approaching army, he was shocked. He quickly gathered his own forces and put them under the command of a general named Nushyar. The two generals, Anbarsal and Nushyar, fighting on behalf of their respective kings, led their armies in a great battle. The tips of swords were like fire, and dust covered the battlefield like smoke. Drums boomed, and the sun trembled and the moon was afraid. In the midst of the battle, Nushyar suddenly came face to face with Anbarsal. Anbarsal drew his poison-soaked sword and cut off Nushyar's head. When the Persian Zabul army saw their leader lying in the dirt, the soldiers turned around in retreat. After the defeat, Athrat wrote a letter to Garshasp about how the king of Kabul had raised an army and reneged on the agreed-upon tribute. He told Garshasp that he didn't want a war and that his son should come quickly. Athrat gave the letter to a messenger, and he set out like the wind on a camel, as fast as an arrow to find Garshasp. The poem doesn't say where Garshasp was, but he was presumably in Zarang, doting on his new wife. Upon receiving the message, which Garshasp had been forewarned about by an oracle, he placed a saddle on his horse and set out with 200 carefully picked warriors. Garshasp encountered a Brahmin sage. The sage praised the hero's courage and told him he would win many future battles. He prophesied that one day the hero would bind the arms of a demon named Minharis. The sage knew Garshasp was on his way to Kabul, and he told Garshasp that if he swore not to damage the temple of Subahar or harm the worshippers there, then the Brahmin would give him 3 pieces of advice. Garshasp agreed. So the Brahmin told him, 1. If one day he met a woman on the road and she wanted him to leave his army and come into her house, if she talked too much, he should not go, but send someone else instead. 2. If he was served red wine when dining with the king of Kabul's daughter during a feast, he should not drink the wine, but insist the princess drink it first. And 3. He was told to build a wooden wall around the city he founded to protect it from the wind. Meanwhile, Athrat's army was defeated yet again. As his forces ran away in a rout, he drew his sword and killed 2 of his own men. He yelled, "Anyone who turns his back, I will make his breast the sheath of my sword." His men rejoined the fight. Many more were killed. The rest were now left too tired to fight. Fortunately, they spied Garshasp's banner in the distance, and the surviving warriors gathered their courage. When he arrived, he rested from his journey and told the men of Zabul that at nightfall he would bring justice, and slay so many enemies they would need to wade through a river of blood. Night came, and it was very dark, like a woman wearing a black robe with her hair hanging down over an ash-smeared face. It was so dark that even a scream couldn't find its way from a man's lips to another's ears. Garshasp led his elite warriors to the enemy camp. When they encountered a patrol, Garshasp drew his sword and cut off their heads. He let out a loud scream and charged with his men into the enemy's midst. They trampled tents and set supplies on fire. There were hills of fallen heroes and rivers of blood from severed limbs. Before long, they had killed 6,000 men from Kabul, and none of Garshasp's men had fallen. The following morning, the now weakened army of Kabul fought another battle against Garshasp. Garshasp rode through the enemy lines. With both hands he struck off heads and helmets. An elephant ran across the plain, wrapped its trunk around his waist, and tried to lift Garshasp from his saddle. But the bold warrior struck the elephant, and soon all the elephants were running away from Garshasp. Soon, everyone in the enemy army knew the opposing general was Garshasp. They lost their nerve and fled in panic. Garshasp and the men of Zabul looted the battlefield. They cared for the wounded and sent the prisoners back to Zabul. Garshasp assembled his men and marched on to Kabul. On the way, they came to the temple of Subahar. It was beautiful, with marble walls and golden gates. The floor was made of pure silver, and in an antechamber was a jeweled throne upon which sat an idol of solid gold. Fresh water poured from this idol's hands, and the throne was surrounded by a crowd of girls, all wearing clothes of the finest silks and waving fans made of peacock feathers. Garshasp found a priest within the temple, and questioned why they worshipped an idol that didn't speak, didn't see, and didn't know anything. But ultimately, Garshasp did not bother them. Instead, he marched the army onward, and in doing so, kept the promise he made with the Brahmin sage. Marching on, Garshasp stumbled upon the retreating king of Kabul. His army was in tatters, and no longer fought for him. The hero knocked him on the head with his club, and the king fell dead into the dust. Next, Garshasp's army came to a narrow valley. Within stood a house, and they saw a woman with a pretty face sitting outside. She asked the soldiers many questions, trying to find out which one was Garshasp. She wanted to invite the general into her house. Garshasp recognized this woman as the one the Brahmin sage had warned him about. He pointed at a soldier he knew to be disloyal and said, "That's Garshasp," and sent him with the woman into the house. Within, a heavy millstone hung from the ceiling. When the man walked through the door, the woman, actually an evil witch, dropped the stone and crushed him. When Garshasp saw what happened, he lit the house on fire and burned the wicked witch. Garshasp continued on to Kabul. Once in the palace, he ascended the throne and declared himself king. He released prisoners from the dungeon and had the palace stripped of its gold and treasures. Countless things were loaded up on elephants, camels, and buffaloes and sent to his father Athrat in Sistan. With the war over, Garshasp could now enjoy hunting and wine and watching the dancing girls of the newly conquered Kabul. One of these girls was the daughter of the old king of Kabul, and she was very beautiful and thirsted for Garshasp's blood. She plotted to poison Garshasp in revenge for the death of her father. When Garshasp returned from hunting, the girl offered him a crystal cup of ruby wine that sparkled like the sun. The tired hero almost took it, but then he remembered the Brahmin's second piece of advice. He handed it back to the girl and ordered her to drink instead. She reluctantly took it back, drank it down, and then fell lifeless to the ground. Time passed, and it was time for Garshasp to return to Zabul and Sistan. His father gave him plenty of advice, and then he happily went to his city of Zarang, taking the prisoners he had brought from Kabul. When they arrived at their destination, Garshasp ordered all the prisoners killed, and their blood be mixed with clay to make bricks for the new city's walls. As construction continued, the wind brought sand that filled the foundations of the new buildings. It was then that Garshasp remembered the last piece of the Brahmin's advice. He ordered a wall made of wood and rock be built to block the desert winds. After 7 years, the city was complete. It was full of beauty, fragrance, and color. The land was a pure paradise, and princes and merchants came from every corner of the world to see it. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening. Next episode, I will cover more of the Garshaspnama poem, so stay tuned.